Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Psych the podcast with your host, B&B. I'm Brianna.
And I'm Brittany.
Yes, so we are here this February. Happy Black History Month to everyone. And just to reintroduce you all to the podcast, we're here to create content for diverse students interested in earning their PhD in psychology.
And today we have special guest, Dr. Kevin Washington. So I know Dr. Washington because he used to be my professor here at Howard. But I'm going to tell you all a little bit about him so that, you can understand why he was asked to be a guest on today's show. So, Dr. Kevin Washington is an African centered psychologist licensed in Florida and Washington, D.C., engaged in the inquiry into the human soul. He is the founder and CEO of Nian Sapo Empowerment Counseling and Consultant. He has taught, lectured at several colleges nationally and internationally. Roland Martin, as well as Essence Magazine, Black Entertainment Television, which we know as BET, Vocal Point, NBC Universal, and many other national and international organizations have sought out his expertise. He is a past president of the Association of Black Psychologists, as well as the former dean pastor of Imani Temple Cathedral. Currently, he is an associate professor and head of sociology and psychology at Grambling State University and is the national director of Black Marriage Day. As a Fulbright Hayes Scholar, Dr. Washington researched the impact of socializing institutions on the healing or restructuring of post-apartheid South Africa, or Azania. It was in Azania where he researched Ubuntu and how it can inform mental health service delivery to people of African ancestry and others. Not only does he work on healing the psychospiritual wounds that are present within people as a result of cultural and historical trauma, he continues developing healing paradigms for persons of African ancestry who has been impacted by persistent enslavement systemic trauma, also known as PST or PIST. This work is critical to his advancing of Ubuntu psychology psychotherapy. He is the founder of Ubuntu Psychotherapy and Black Love Coaching. As the founder of Ubuntu Psychotherapy, he advances a culturally sensitive modality for mental health counseling and psychotherapy for Black men and boys, as well as Black and African families. He advances culturally relevant trauma informed care and interventions to be utilized by psychotherapists that is culturally inclusive and particularly concomitantly. Through his research and writing, he seeks to assist people to live life with power, purpose, and passion. Dr. Washington, it is great to have you here today, to see you again. I haven't seen you, since my first year of school because you left us for Grambling, but that's okay. But, you know, when we were thinking of creating this show, I initially thought about you and how you seek to advance, Black psychologists and the training that you do and the work that you do to make sure that we are creating culturally competent psychologists. And you were the perfect fit for this show. And again, we want to welcome you and thank you for joining us today.
Hey, thank you so much for the invitation to be here. It is a pleasure, and it's good to be thought of highly because this is the work that we do. However, also engaging with you and your cohorts in your first year was really uh, a highlight of my experience. The first year was my first year had a first year that was a good group, and then to have you all and your inquiry into the human functioning was very enlightening and refreshing.
Well,
Yes,
thank you.
thank you. Thank you for that introduction, Brittany, and thank you, Dr. Washington, for being here with us today. So, on today's episode, we're going to dive right into some of the highlights in Black history apparent in psychology today and its past history. We're also going to get into the Association of Black Psychologists and the role of that organization in the field, also talking about Black psychology, African centered psychology, as well as Black identity, and also looking for programs that are culturally competent. So, This leads me into the first question, which is, what are some ways Black students can look for programs that are actually culturally competent?
I think first of all, we have to come to a definition of what is cultural competence, right? Because oftentimes we have this very vague ideology, a construct of what it is, and so we become lost in the sauce haze, days but a haze. But so first thing, it's understanding this what it means for cultural groups to actually exist in a space. Within the Western context, there is this notion that there is one culture and that everybody else is subculture. That's one of the challenges that I have with multiculturalism. It is cultural, it is Europeans and everyone else. But cultural competence encompasses this idea of being aware of one's worldview and how that worldview impacts everything that they do. And so when you're trying to identify a program that is culturally competent, it's important to understand that they have to have these critical skills, right? One is awareness, being aware of the impact or the influence of culture on one's human functioning. Understanding the idea of their attitudes. The attitudes, of course, in psychology means their beliefs, the belief systems that they operate from. Some even call it their BS, right? The belief system. But understanding the beliefs and how are they developing a level of awareness into human functioning. The other one is knowledge, that what is the knowledge base of knowledge skills that seems to operate within a program? And then what are the skills that they are enhancing within themselves, right? So every department should be engaged in the process of enhancing their skill set to be able to serve a diverse population better. And many programs can speak the language but cannot actually deliver. Dr. Cross talks about these 6 stages of cultural competence, that there is cultural destructiveness, cultural incapacity, cultural blindness, cultural precompetence, cultural competence, and then there's cultural proficiency. And of course, it starts out with cultural destructiveness. That is when one is just very reckless about themselves and not really having a level of awareness that there is a thing called a culture within any organization. So understanding the policies, the practices, the structures that operate and guide and govern the organization. So as a student, be aware of the practices that one engages in, because the programs will tell you who they are by what they do. So because the mouth can tell you anything, but behavior doesn't lie, right? When one has the incapacity, that is the lack of capacity to make shifts, it seems at some level, even though they may have some understanding that something is different, they just cannot move beyond their biases. One program I know of had students in it, and it had a nice statement of cultural awareness. However, there was a time when they gathered the students together who were complaining about the program, and they gathered at a place called the Southern Breeze Plantation to talk about the issues of cultural issues within the program, right? So that is a clear example of the incapacity of the program. And I'll tell you about that because that was my program. And so there's cultural blindness, where one thinks that somehow not seeing the idea of culture is important, but not recognizing that cultural blindness is a deficit, because to not see culture is not to see the essence of who a person is. And so that can be very dangerous. So they say, well, when I see you, I don't see color. Well, my question is, what did you see to not see me? Because you don't tell everybody you don't see culture. So I don't see color when I see you, but you saw something to say you didn't see it. And so that cultural blindness can be very destructive, because it denies one their true expression, who they are, their language, their values, their beliefs. And so we have to be aware of that. Cultural precompetence, he says, is there's awareness that the person of a variety of strengths, and that there's an awareness that there should be some movement towards making change. But again, it's precompetence because it's just awareness of strengths, but no real action. And then cultural competence, where there's some action that's in place, where there's a mission statement that exists. There are direct, tangible steps that they are taking to embrace cultural views, such as research, not only research, but understanding the climate, where there's support groups. There are even faculty at these programs, right? So to say that you're culturally competent, but you don't have faculty of diverse cultural groups tells me a lot about who you are. Then proficiency is when you begin to move into a space by which you actually deliver on your word and find ways to make sure that there's an embracing of culture, but not only in word, but again, in policy, in practices, as well as advocating out in the streets, in the community. Being culturally um, active, social justice minded, right? Because there's no way to talk about psychology or counseling for people of African descent or any diverse population without it being an act of social justice, because the Western system is predicated in large part on this idea of the inferiority of the cultural other. And
Mm-hmm.
so we have to be clear then that to give somebody some level of strength, agency, is really giving them a way to take a stance against the cultural environment that says that they are inferior.
Mm. Thank you so much for that in-depth explanation of what cultural competence is. And that definitely gave me a lot to think about. I hope the listeners as well. So just hearing that definition gave me the question. Brittany spoke to you as her professor in the course that you taught here when you were a professor at Howard University. What were some ways in that course when you were teaching, since I know it resonated so much with Brittany as a student, but you as a professor, how were you intentionally seeking to teach levels of cultural competency within your course?
So to have a short definition, right, of cultural competence is to have these congruent practice skills, behaviors, attitudes, and of course people skills that understand how systems function. And so being at an HBCU, it was incumbent upon me to talk about some element of
Mm-hmm.
the Black experience such that individuals could begin to see themselves not only in the practice of counseling and psychotherapy, but also in the process, and also see their unique issues that they have existed in or lived with in their homes and their communities, and see those as uh, topics that could really be researched and discussed on multiple levels. And so that was the intentionality of it, is to make sure that there was not only this multiculturalism, but to make sure that there was this African-centered perspective where people can see
Mm-hmm.
themselves as
Mm-hmm.
being essential to the conversation of psychology, and not somewhere on the periphery of the
Yes.
human development or human behavioral sciences.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So, Brittany, with what Dr. Washington just said, and also your experiences in his course, what are some of the takeaways, or how was that received to you as instruction or as things being taught to you?
Well, I would definitely say that it was uplifting and enlightening, because that isn't something that I feel like I received at my previous institution,
Mm,
which is a large part of why I decided to come to Howard, because there is this level of understanding of Blackness, and becoming a Black psychologist is not the same as, I feel like, what I would have received at that institution. I feel like my spirit is fed at
mm,
Howard. Like there isn't a place, or there isn't a point, like Dr. Washington said, where a person's saying like they don't see me because they don't see color. Like I have to be seen, and I have to be fed into, in order for me to grow into this culturally competent psychologist and benefiting other people that I work with. And I feel like, you know, Dr. Washington's class was actually the very first class that I took, because it was on a Monday. It was literally the very first class that I walked into. And
mm,
not only that, it was also a class about skills and working with clients that are diverse. So that being my very first class, at an HBCU, was just, it was powerful.
mm,
And this is why Dr. Washington and I, we still communicate, and we still have a relationship even though he's at Grambling, because I'm just really appreciative of that, and of course of this program for even offering me that.
mm,
So, and I guess, well, my question for you, Brianna, is, were you even searching for like culturally competent programs when you were applying?
mm.
Like, what does that look like on that end?
Wow, that's a great question, Brittany. And definitely, I'm more than happy to speak to that, especially because that process is so fresh to me since I'm a first year student in this program. So, definitely. And just a little bit about me and my background. I just recently graduated from Temple University with a bachelor's in psychology, but also Africology, African American Studies. And I also chartered a chapter of the Association of Black Psychologists. student circle chapter at Temple University. So I was introduced to African psychology, African centered psychology, and things of that nature through me seeking it out, since it wasn't just given to me at Temple University as an undergraduate. So when I was looking into my graduate studies, that was huge for me. And also going to a predominantly white institution. There were, of course, some benefits to that program, but regarding cultural competency, there were some things that the program was severely lacking in a way, like you had mentioned, Brittany, your spirit being full, and also Dr. Washington had mentioned the African being at the center of what you're doing and not the periphery. So that's also something Africology, African American Studies taught me, and that is something that carried into my grad school search. So I was looking for programs that would not only feed my soul, my spirit, my yearning for education, a culturally relevant education, but
Mm-hmm.
also a training program that I knew the populations I want to work with, which is Black people, people of color, and minorities. So I needed all of those qualifications to kind of be met in a program, not only for what I'm learning and receiving, but the tools that you're giving me and how culturally competent those are. So those were sorts of things that kind of I was really looking forward to going to a HBCU in my graduate school education, and everything that you and Dr. Washington had talked about is I felt what Howard had and offered and what I wanted in a graduate school program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Well, Dr. Washington, we have that brings us to our next question of how can students create a research agenda that works with African Americans or even other people of color, other minorities?
Mm,
Important. What Brianna said is uh, challenging, right? Because you go into certain spaces and you have these academic experiences, but are
Mm-hmm.
not being fortified. Brittany mentioned about being fortified spiritually, and the issue is that the academy doesn't often reward that spiritual experience. So the academia rewards the other experience, which talks about this global construct of one size fit all education. So they even try to convince us that somehow to focus on issues that are of that pertain to our reality is more in line of social psychology or something outside of what real psychology is. But let's be clear that European psychology is based on the normative behaviors of European behavior, right? European ideology, European worldview. So Western psychology then is designed at its core to facilitate the proper behaviors for Europeans. And so we have to realize that the development of the discipline is grounded in that. We know that G. Stanley Hall came up with the concept of adolescence, which is based on not just simply age, but he submitted that or posited that individuals of different racial ethnic groups were at an incomplete stage of development, that they were adolescents. So the Chinese and the Indian and the Africans were not completely adults in their development. That's one of the reasons why I have a difficult time with us using the language girl, girlfriend and boyfriend. So I think Brittany can tell you that the first time we had a conversation about someone in her life or anyone, it was in class. It was about my boyfriend, my girlfriend. I mean, is he a boy or is he a man? That's the question, because
mm,
the language and the lingua franca has been within the annals of psychology is that somehow we are less than human. But also Benjamin Rush, who's credited with being the father of American psychiatry, and whose face is a part of the American Psychiatric Association, want to justify slavery. And one of the things he said is that people of African descent suffer from what was called nigritude, that their skin color was what it was because of the of a reverse leprosy concept. So the idea that their skin, if they turn it back white, they would be healed. So at the beginning of psychology and psychiatry in this country, we clearly see that there was a thought process about the inferior nature of African people. So therefore, the academy thinks that way. And so it becomes an anomaly to think about research that will impact the lives of Black and brown people. But you know that the media projects Black inferiority. We don't understand that educational systems project the superiority of whites, and that we know about all of the disparities in healthcare. I mean, COVID-19 has revealed a lot of that to us in economic inequities, right? Racial profiling. So we know that it wasn't police brutality that killed George Floyd. It was a modern day lynching, right? So it was lynching because lynching is done by asphyxiation. We know that there were patty rollers, or the earliest system of policing in this country started out with individuals going to capture runaway slaves. So we see Ahmaud Arbery being shot down as if he were a runaway enslaved African. So this is an ongoing process that we have to recognize is wearing and tearing on our psyche. So we talk about transgenerational trauma that we encounter, and so this is important to know that when doing research, people are asking the question, well, how can I do research? Well, let's look at this, right? So if we understand that by Diaz and Reza, they talked about how mice can get a whiff of orange blossom and then get shocked, and that the mice would associate this orange blossom smell with the shock, but that these mice would have pups that would have the orange blossom smell, but their bodies would have a visceral response as if they were being shocked. So genetically, the trauma was passed down, but then those mice would grow up and they would have pups and had the same experience. So we see that at least across 2 generations, this trauma was transmitted. That's a deep area for research to engage in, not simply to look at research in the context of the social cultural phenomena of trauma, but I mean, there's a physiological response that can be looked at. So we talk about biopsychology. We talk about a variety of areas that just are influenced by trauma. We know that trauma influences one mentally, emotionally, and physically. This is a deep, rich area for research. How does it impact how we relate to one another? How does it impact how I raise my children? How does it impact the foods that I eat? How does it impact how I think in school? How does it impact every aspect of my life? So we take one bit of research to look at the transgenerational trauma and look at how does it impact all of this stuff. What does Make America Great Again do for me viscerally? Is that an orange blossom smell that can generate visceral responses within me to begin to harken back to the enslavement experience? So we have to look at that there are multiple ways of doing the work, and it's not social psychology. Somehow they want to put this thing out like they're doing objective research that's not based on some personal beliefs. Well, first of all, who made a decision to research what they're researching? That's personal from the very beginning. How do you determine? How do you assess that? Right? That's personal, because you say, what, I'm using ANOVA, I'm gonna use aggression, multiple regression. I'm gonna use all of this stuff. That's personal. So it's not objective. It is subjective research that has some level of removing the human subjectiveness from the research, not the other way around, right? So the point is that we have to be clear that there is an agenda, and so we get reduced down to saying this is social psychology that we're doing. No, this is real stuff that we having to contend with every single day. Like what is the toll of the ill treatment of Black people over generations, right? What does it mean to be dehumanized from one space to another, racism and oppression? What does it mean? What does it mean to see a January 6th event where individuals are in the Capitol building, but then to know in the summer prior to that people came out and protested peacefully, and they were met with individuals in riot gear, right? That's a response. I mean, that's social psychology, but also that's personal stuff. That's youth and development. I mean, it's a variety of areas that you could take the study into. But the problem is that we don't think like that, right? Look at this, right? So we know that Blacks are 20% more likely to have serious psychological distress than adult whites. That's work right there. I mean, out the gates, the distress is one thing. How does it impact job performance? How does it affect, I don't know, whatever, right? Adult Blacks live below poverty are 2 to 3 times more likely to report serious psychological distress than those living above poverty, right? So now let's look at even the vaccine conversation. Who gets it? Who doesn't get it? Should I get it, or why should I not get it? Well, and what comes up with that conversation? Well, we know about the Tuskegee experiment. Okay, we know about that. Well, we know about Henry and the Lacks. Yes. So we know that there have been some inequities in research, right? So there's a question and a concern. Why all of a sudden are people who are at this level of poverty deemed to be essential workers, when prior to that they would despise individuals, right? So we have to get our essential workers back to work again, right? Because again, it is an element of racism and oppression, but nobody's asking the question, what about their health, their mental health? their mental well-being, their physiological well-being. That's not being asked, right? It's the question is, go get a vaccine. Well, the issue is, why should I do that, right? If the concerns become as great for me to get back to work, equal being concerned about hypertension in the Black community, which is tied to racism and stress. We deal with ovarian cancer, and we deal with uterine cancer, and we deal with prostate cancer. If the interest in that was as equal to the interest in me getting the vaccine, then I say, hey, we're at a point where we can really talk some real talk. But the question is, how does that impact the psychological well-being of a population? Right. And so it says adult Blacks are more likely to have feelings of sadness, hopelessness, and worthlessness than adult whites. Why? A seatbed of research alone, just that alone, right? And Black teenagers, especially females, are attempting suicide at higher rates than they have done in years past. So this is a foundation for a developing research agenda, is being able to look at some critical issues within your community, within your space, within your own family, within wherever you come from, and ask the question, well, what does it look like? What does therapy look like? What does treatment look like? What does if I was at NIMH, what could I research there around trauma or around anxiety, right? So you can take a variety of topics and just run all day with it, and it has implications for who you are as a person, because at the end of the day, our early psychologists dealt with research that was about what was going to be best for the people, not best for some doggone research agenda, not agenda, but a what's that thing called? A dossier, but what is going to be best for people. And as a result, your dossier becomes enhanced, right? Mm-hmm. So critical question, and I'll close out here, is that what do you give, what is the diagnosis for a person experiencing trauma across several generations? Real question. Right? We can't say post-traumatic stress disorder, because post means it's over, right? What behavior and physical health markers will we expect to see occur? How will they relate to one another and their communities, right? How can you really engage in healing when denial is present, right? These things are real issues to explore. And people talked about it, with Robert Carter mentioning race-based trauma, and Jordan Guillory mentions traumatic slave syndrome. And again, we can't have post-traumatic because they haven't gotten to a post moment. And in South Africa, that they mentioned continuous traumatic stress disorder. They were onto it early on. I found this out much later. And I mentioned persistent enslavement systemic trauma. It is an ongoing process, right? So it is then redefining the process of how we define what it means to be injured, and then ask the question, what is being injured? And that's how we have an agenda that shifts from a European agenda to looking at one that looks at us as a people.
Yeah, Dr. Washington, with all of that being said, with the rich history, of African Americans in this country, how important do you think it is that students of color research populations of color?
Well, all right. So one book that comes to mind, right? Black Fatigue, done by Winters. He talks about how racism erodes the mind, body, and spirit. I don't see how a person of African descent, and then to extend that to Latinx, to extend it out to Asian American, to extend it out to Native American. I don't see how one could conceptualize going into a program and not thinking about, what does this mean for me? Because somebody went to law school and made a decision that the policies around crack cocaine would be, the sanctions would be higher than those with powder cocaine. Somebody made a critical decision around more money should be devoted to leukemia research and sickle cell research. That was a conscious decision that people knew, say that somebody in my family has leukemia and not sickle cell, so I'm going to research this more. A critical decision was made around who receives what dollars and what testing goes into educational systems that tracks African Americans into the lower level, especially at programs at higher rates. See, somebody's making those critical decisions, and that's not again an innocuous one. That is one that is concerted because it's happening on all walks of life, right? In law, it's happening in politics, it's happening where we work, it's happening in every aspect of our being. So the question is, how is that you cannot think about how to do some work that's going to impact people that look like you if you're black and brown, right? And yellow and red, right? The question becomes, how is it not possible? We recognize that the high levels of alcoholism among the indigenous population, or the elements of high blood pressure and hypertension based on the allostatic load within the black community, right? These are real issues that need to be addressed. And so simply addressing psychological work is not only what we're doing. When we address that work, we're dealing with longevity, we're dealing with life expand, we're dealing with health, quality of life, just simply by talking to people about how do you deal with your day-to-day dynamics, right? The cravings for sugar based on the allostatic load, which is influenced by the increased adrenaline, which influences cortisol level, and increased cortisol within the bloodstream can cause the arteries to become hardened, arteriosclerosis, but also it can influence coronary heart disease by causing blockage. So there's that issue, and it's associated with dealing with racism and stress and other factors of life that was talked about earlier on about the health and human services area, right? So how do you not look at this when every black person has somebody in their family somewhere down the line with sugar and pressure, right?
Sure.
Right? You know what I'm saying? They got either diabetes or
High blood pressure,
high
high
blood pressure,
cholesterol.
right? These are real issues. And yeah, I'm in school. I'm being educated at the institution, and so I'm learning to do what? Do you not see that there's a connection between the psychological well-being of a population and their health? And so your work then helps to extend their life, but more importantly, helps to extend your life and those that come behind you, right? So executive function is influenced by dealing with stress and racism and oppression. People can't think right. So now we got a gang warfare going on because why? The executive function, the frontal lobe is being thwarted by trying to survive, emotionalism, right? Academic performance in children suffers. We know that when adrenaline increases, short-term memory is enhanced, but long-term memory is suppressed. So imagine having adrenaline in the system for a long period of time, going to school, you try to live in a space where there's constant gun violence and everything else, adrenaline is high, you're being taught to memorize content where long-term memory is suppressed because of the adrenaline that's in your system. You can't go outside for recess because you didn't finish your homework, because you can't remember anything because you're trying to survive. Now you can't burn off the adrenaline. What happens? You're frustrated as hell in school. Now you have a situation where you have a child acting out in school. Well, what now? That's a prison, a pipeline process being cultivated in the school system. These are simple things that we can begin to understand, that the small bit of research that we engage in influences the whole, right? And so it's not just simply, what do we do? The issue is why is it so difficult for us to even think about how to do this kind of work, right? And why does it seem like an anomaly? Like, this is really amazing that you came up with this idea to look at the black family, and it's not amazing. It's what I see every day, right? When I deal with black men in my family that all died right at the age of 60, and they were not biologically related to one another, tells me that there's something happening. And my father died from complications due to diabetes, and one died from gout and other things. And so these were men who were engaged in the community, and they died at around the same time. They married to 3 women that were biologically related, but they died at around the same age. Right? Amazing stuff. Wow. So anyway, that is that part. So how do we not do it? We have a lot of work to do.
Definitely. Thank you for all of that information. And speaking of reflecting our reality, our history, and being that it is Black History Month, this brings us into our next question. As a past national president of the Association of Black Psychologists, can you just speak a little bit, Dr. Washington, about your experiences with that organization?
It was my engagement with the organization as a graduate student that really opened my eyes up to see the impact and the importance of who we are as a people. I remember my first year in graduate school at Texas A&M University. I went to hear Dr. Naeem Akbar. I heard that he was speaking. I didn't know much about who he was, but I knew that I should, because somebody said, are you going to see him? So he didn't come to Texas
Gotta
A&M.
know Dr. Akbar.
Right. Had no idea, really. And then I traveled down the road about 30 minutes or so to Texas, to Prairie View A&M, where he was speaking for Black History Month, I believe. And so he asked me, his first question was, I caught him as he was trying to get into the building. I caught him. I said, well, what is tell me more about who you are. Tell me more about who you are, but also, my name is so and so here. I'm program. Are you a member of AB Psi? First question. I'm trying to hit him up like, he doesn't know anything. He hit me up like, are you a member of AB Psi? Humbled me right there on the spot. And so I listened to him speak, and he was so amazing just to hear how he articulated the human condition for Black people. So I soaked up everything he had. As a matter of fact, in that program, I stopped everything I was doing at 9, 10 o'clock, whatever I was studying, and I just would read his works, Dr. Wade Noble's works.
Yes.
Of course, Malefi Asante, the Afrocentric thought was really burgeoning
Shout out
at
to
that
Temple.
time. The Temple and Maulana Karinga, Linda James Myers, Dr. Myers. So all this was happening at this time. And so no matter what I did, I made a point to stop to study myself. And that's when AB Psi really began to become a larger reality. Then one person in our program was a member of the Houston chapter of AB Psi. So he had application, so I joined. And when I went to the first conference, when I was doing my internship at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., we met in Philadelphia. And I got a chance to be in a space. And by now, I'd researched these individuals. So I was in a room with the people that had kept me alive in graduate school. So I look, and that's Wade Nobles. I mean, I was just starstruck for the entire week. I was just like, I'm breathing the same air with these people. And I remember walking over to Dr. Nobles, asking him some questions, and he gave me some real support around my dissertation. AB Psi also, I worked in the office after that. AB Psi office in DC when I had an office space. I actually I needed to. This is back when we had to mail out our dissertation questionnaires, not not survey monkeying and everything else that we do, right? So I actually had run out of money, and so I worked in the office. And in exchange for work in the office, they allowed me to make so many copies of my dissertation questionnaires, right? So I would work so many hours and then copy so many and mail them out. So I owe a lot to AB Psi in that respect, because that is how I got to where I am today. And just to be able to interface with these individuals that we talk about, and now to consider them what we call jegnas, or mentors for the European perspective. They continue to guide me. I speak with Dr. Nobles often. He's pushed me in so many different directions. Brought me out to California to teach in the program there at San Francisco State University, and pushed me into the position of leadership of AB Psi. That was his decision. And he's one of the founders of AB Psi. So that was a high honor. So this is the relationship that we have. And AB Psi has grown me up in the context of understanding who I am as a psychologist and how I serve not only myself, but how do I serve our people to become better.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. So, and also keeping on this, talking about AB Psi, what are some of the teachings, whether it comes from the purpose of the organization or the mission, that can benefit, or even some of the programs that they do? What are some of the benefits of that to Black psychologists?
Okay. So I used to work, I was a part of what was called the African Psychological Institute. I also was over the rituals committee of the organization, and then as a group called CACOS, which is the Committee on African-Centered cultural organizational structure. And so in that, I learned a lot about what it meant to be an African healer. And so an African psychologist, a healer, that is one that moves people of African descent to their healing form, right? So you have to have knowledge of the original formation of the thing to help it to heal. Psychology, psychotherapy is like a cast is to a broken arm. The cast provides the structure for the arm to heal. But if the therapist does not have a clear understanding of the original formation of the psyche, then as a result, the therapist may prescribe a treatment modality that is inconsistent with the health and well-being of the individual. And so ABC help you to understand how to do that. And so the healing of us as a people must be in alignment with the Utamawazo, right? The cultural structure of thought of a people. That comes from Dr. Murabani's work in a book called Yurugu. A phenomenal person. I got a chance to meet her through ABC as well. Well, before ABC, but I interacted with her through ABC. And the healing techniques must heal the rupture and extend the splinter. That is what Dr. Noble says, must heal the rupture and extend the splinter. So what I got from the API was that African psychology is ultimately concerned with understanding the systems of being, of human beingness, the features of human functioning, and the restoration of normal and or natural order of human development. As such, it is used to resolve personal and social problems and to promote optimal functioning. I thought that was a powerful definition for understanding psychology. I also learned that the African-centered paradigm is that the value of the collective is the most salient part of what it means to be. We see things like Ubuntu, we'll talk about Ubuntu therapy, that we are important. I am because we are, therefore I am, John and Bitty's work. That the communal consciousness is what we strive for. The idea of communal self-knowledge is the key to total health. The spirit is the primary source of health, healing, and holism. If we go back and look at the beginning of psychology, ancient Kemet, they said that the whole and sound mind is that leads one to prosperity and peace. That when you have somebody in ill health, in large part because their sane spirit is out of order. That healing the spirit is the same thing as healing the body. That many things that we encounter are a function of a psychological phenomenon. How many times have you, can you think back to the time when you were infatuated with somebody in elementary school or whatever, right? Your first crush. Think about your body had a response. Your mind said one thing, but your body butterflies and you couldn't talk around that person, right? So there's a connection clearly between the mind and the body. And so the last thing, and how we implement this, African psychology, is that we recognize that there's spirit in all things, that we appreciate people for their journey. Everybody has a unique journey, and that our movement, our process is to move them better along in their journey, to increase their strength, to gain insight from their journey, and to keep people in alignment with their purpose. Because when one tries to survive in the hells of North America in the context of racism and oppression, one can lose sight of their particular purposing. And so that purposing can cause them some real problems, right? And so acknowledge that everybody has a particular purpose. And so ABC, founded in 1968 in San Francisco, California, right in or at the end of the civil rights movement, was profound. People left the American Psychological Association's meeting, realizing that they'd not been treated fairly, and said we have to have our voices heard. And one of their first endeavors was to look at what now is called the Larrapy versus Riles case. Individuals began to challenge the testing of Black children in schools. And so this again was the social justice movement of an organization, trying to make sure that the children are not perpetually mistreated within the school system. So we see that the organization started off with this in mind. But the earliest Black psychologists before there was ABC had the same agenda. If you look at Inez Beverly Prozer, who was looking at children in school systems, or you look at the famous Clark Dahl study, again, looking at how children, how they perceive themselves, looking at the IQ testing in Black children. So this is part of the DNA of psychology, Black psychologists, not simply, again, building a personal portfolio, but what am I doing to impact change? And let you know, of course, the Clark Dahl study was used in the context of the Brown versus Board of Education, right? With Thurgood Marshall. Think about these scholars at Howard University, coming under the guidance of Francis Cecil Sumner, who was the first African American to receive a PhD in this country in 1920, right? So he received the degree at that time. He is the head of the Department of Psychology at Howard, and he brings up these individuals who do this research, who connect with Thurgood Marshall, who comes through a program done by a man named Houston, who developed the night school for law school students to go to the law school at Howard to get a degree, so Black people can work during the day and go to school at night. Think about this. All this is happening at this space, at this time, to impact change. So law schools think about how to deal with the people. Psychologists think about how to deal with the people, right? All this was going on to say we have to make a change. So it wasn't about, I'm going to go out, I'm going to be an attorney and they're going to love me. It was about, how am I going to make a difference in the lives of people who are being oppressed? On top of, right, more scholars, right? You had Charles Drew, and you had Ernest Just. All this was going on. This intelligence was going on. Langston Hughes and other people. This was all happening in this space. You had Carter G. Woodson, who's the father of Black History Month at Howard University as well. He was frustrated because he would talk about the importance of Black people understanding themselves, and Black folks would say that I didn't go to school to learn about that Black stuff. Now think about that. That was him in 1930s, and we having the same conversation in 2021 about I'm not going to school to really do that Black stuff in psychology. Almost 100 years later, the same conversation. Why is that? Right? Woodson says that when you control a man's thinking, you don't worry about his actions. You tell him to come here, to go there. He will find his place and he will stay in it. Don't tell him to go to the back door. He goes to the back door without being told. In fact, if there is no back door, he will make one. His education makes it necessary. That to me sends us a powerful message about the importance and significance of proper education. Because when one is educated into who they are and why they function, it changes everything that they do in their entire lives. And so that brings us back to, Brittany, why I approached the class the way I did. The approach to the class is not simply about you coming in and getting information, right? And then you can pass a test and you can say, I have these skills now. The challenge is, do you understand what to do with the information that you have, right? Very different approach. And it's like, well, and people will say, well, we don't have to have a class on Black psychology because we get the Black stuff with Dr. Washington whenever he teaches. Just because you receive a piece of cake doesn't mean that you know how to make a cake, right? So just because you get some information or content about Blackness doesn't mean that you understand the depths of what goes into the making of Black African psychology, right? So that's a whole nother conversation about understanding spirit and spirit. It's understanding how one approaches the classroom based on the notion that everyone is a knowing and knowable spirit, right? The idea of replicating oneself through giving a student content that makes them go to the next level. That's not what was, you didn't know what I was doing. You just knew how it impacted you when I did it. Is that making sense? You understood the impact of it, but not know what, that's psychology. That is Black psychology. Understand that this is the notion of what it means to be human. This is who we are, and this is how we function. This is the light that we bring into the world. And so we want to make sure that we understand that when we talk about what is being damaged in the context of racism and oppression in this space, it is the spirit that is being damaged. You can deal with other things, but the spirit, that's what we talk about. You're not going to disrespect me like that. What is that you talk? Or we say that you don't know me like that, right? But I know your name is Brianna. Yeah, but you don't know me like that though, right? What is it that I don't know, Brianna? I don't know your essence, right? I know your name, but I don't know your essence. And so that's what we're saying. You don't know me, right? Think about the language that we use, lit and so forth and so on. The idea of the languaging that we use indicates the deep psychology of other people. We say that I don't F with them like that, right? I don't F with them like that, or I don't F with them. What is that saying? That tells me about character. That's deep psychology. That's not some surfacey stuff, right? Because you don't F with somebody, that means that you don't mess with them at all, right?
True.
Yeah.
But if it's like that, that means then that, hey, I may talk to this person. However,
There's a level to it.
there's a level to it. How do you know that? Who taught you that, Brianna? How did you know that to be the case? It was something that you understood, because that's your deep psychology, what it means to be African.
Yeah.
It helps you to survive in a space,
Mm-hmm.
right? We have to understand those kind of things about ourselves. Know our language tells us a lot about who we are as a people. There's a lot to study there. The reason why that's important is because that language tells us how we have been able to ascend above the madness of being incarcerated in this space called America, called Haiti, called Jamaica. Those are penal colonies, basically. People were brought to Haiti and just dropped off. I mean, that's the facts, right?
Mm-hmm.
But how people were able to survive that's deep psychology. What have they been able to use? And everywhere you go, you find spirituality being central to the African existence.
Yes.
Yeah. Dr. Washington, I think you brought up some great points. And I feel like this kind of goes back to what Brianna and I were talking about, attending PWIs, and how we probably wouldn't even have this type of exposure had we decided to, continue there for our graduate studies. And it's not to say that they aren't great institutions, but they wouldn't fuel this part of us that are necessary, to being the best psychologist that we can be. So I guess my question to you is, what suggestions or what can you offer to students who might not even be getting this kind of exposure to African psych? Like, we have a Black psychology course at Howard that explores these concepts and some of the, characteristics of African centered psychology. But what, I guess, suggestions do you have for students who don't have this exposure but want to be competent when working with Black clients?
You know, that's a real good question. The course that you're in was spearheaded in large part by Dr. Sean Utsi, and I worked
Oh
with
yeah.
him
You
on the
dropping
back.
some names today. For the listeners who don't know,
Definitely.
I'm like, the
Know
listeners
now.
who do not know these names, research them immediately after listening
Please.
to this podcast. But
Dr.
I'm
Sean,
sorry, continue,
no
Dr.
worries. He
Washington.
was he was there at Howard, and he initiated that course, and I helped him put together that syllabus, the first syllabus for that course, because I was in DC at the time, and so we co-wrote it also with Dr. Mark Bolden. And in that the course, Dr. Usey left before the course was taught, and so I taught the first theories and applications of African-centered Black psychology. Right, that was the first time it was ever taught. I was called up to help teach it, which was a high honor to be able to do that. I had also developed the same course at the undergraduate level, not quite the same course, at the Grambling State University when I was there. I left grad school. I was working on my dissertation, and so I went down there to work, and so I introduced that course to that curriculum. That's still there as well as one on psychology of the Black family. That was just the work
Mm-hmm.
to be done. I saw the benefit in that coming through ABSI and other spaces, that we have to find ways to transmit the knowledge by any means necessary. So I'm telling you that to say that what can you do if you don't have these experiences is always plug into these individuals that are doing this work.
Mm-hmm.
Plug into the content that exists. I mean, there's so much online that you can research and look into. You can look into, of course, the works of Optimal Psychology by Linda James Myers. You can look at Yurugu, the book Yurugu by Dr. Ani, an African-centered critique of European cultural thoughts and beliefs. You can begin to look at other works, like I mentioned to you, by Mary Frances Winters, which talks about the how psychology, how racism erodes the spirit. Look at the works of Maulana Karinga. Plug and have your own ciphers, right, around these topics. You have to plug into the source, because if you operate in a silo, you will be taken out.
Mm.
I began to expand my knowledge base as a graduate student when I read a book called Even the Rat Was White by Guthrie.
Mhm.
And the book was amazing to me, and it talked about the history of psychology. And it was given to me by a white professor, Dr. Ludi Benjamin, who is considered to be one of the hallmarks and one of the stalwarts in history of psychology. And so he knew of Dr. Guthrie. And so I got the book, I looked at it and I read it. And I called Dr. Guthrie because, hey, I'm a grad student. I didn't have no sense to know I couldn't talk to these people. And so I called him, and yeah, this is pre-emailing and so forth and whatnot. So
Mhm.
anyway, so connected with him, and he said, well, you should talk to my student. And his student was Dr. Anthony Smith. Anthony Smith was not a doctor at the time. Anthony Smith connected me with Adesai Jamu, and from there, I decided I got connected with Kevin Coakley. And so another name, dropping another name, some more names out there. You should know these individuals. And so this is the space that we were in. We were connecting, but we got there through the elders, right, who had done the work.
Mhm.
And so to this day, we still are in communication with one another because it was that work. And then Dr. Asa Hilliard at he was at Georgia State at the time.
Mhm.
Um, no, Georgia Tech, my bad. In Georgia. I know that we were down in Atlanta. How about that one?
That's
Mhm.
And
right.
and Kevin Coakley was there. And so one day I swung through, I was going from DC back to Louisiana, and I stopped to visit with Kevin Coakley, and Adesai happened to be there at the same time. And so we ended up going to meet with Dr. Asa Hilliard in his office, and he was just sharing with us papers, and he shared with us so much content that it made our head spin. But then he showed us his Vita. I never forget how his Vita was just, it was just, it was thick. Like, what is this?
Had to be
Right?
impressive.
And it was so amazing. And that was inspirational to be in this space, for him to be to share humbly with us. There's so much information and content. I mean, we just went to go say hi to him, and he took 2 or 3 hours with us and just kept going and
Mhm.
kept going and kept going.
Mm.
Those things kept me going. It kept us all
Mhm.
going, and right, having the audios with us, so you can see the lectures online. You look at the old lectures, and they plug into to the new people, and they'll tell you who to talk to, those that are still living. And but I remember driving the car with the audios of Akbar and others playing, and I would just listen and listen and listen. Even though I was isolated in Texas for a certain period of time, I plugged into the people, but I wasn't also afraid to plug into other people who I felt knew something as well. And
Mhm.
so we had these various ciphers. So do not operate in a silo.
Mm.
Connect with other people. I
Mhm.
know that there's more to the knowledge than what you're getting in your academic programs that
Mhm.
don't have folks that look like you in those programs, right? And
Mhm.
not and be also I again I stopped every day. It didn't matter what was happening. Some other, my classmates said, "Well, you got to study for this exam." I was like, yeah, that's cool, but I'm going to stop every day. And I made a conscious decision
Mhm.
that at least 1 hour of the day
Mm.
would be devoted to studying somebody like me, so that I
Mhm.
could be fortified to go in and fight the battle the next day.
Mm.
Right. And that was like a vaccine. That was like a prophylactic. That was what kept me from being torn asunder in the context of a graduate program. I
Mhm.
also, with that information, I went to talk to some people one time at the YMCA. I never forget this. And I was talking and sharing some information that came from Dr. Akbar and somebody else. We want you to be our Black History Month speaker. Like, wait, what? I was not speaking at that time. I was just, hey. And so I said, okay, now I'm speaking. When I
Mm.
spoke, I started developing a rites of passage program for youth in the program. So what happened is that in this place that I was attending graduate school, I was on the television for the Black History Month program, and I was also being videoed for a rites of passage program. So my department felt like I was really big. Like, this guy's coming in, he's big. It's like, no, it really was just I happened to go into the community. I said something, you're gonna be a Black History Month speaker. Then that turned into speaking for an NAACP program. And then that turned into something else. So the next year I was in the news for something else. Now on television, bam, here he is.
Mm.
The third year I was in the program, I was on the, I was, something that happened that was racially motivated on campus. And I didn't go to class this day
Mm.
because I was sick. And I went to the grocery store to get some soup. I never get, I don't want some soup. I'm going to go home and I'm going to lay down. And that was it. And all of a sudden the camera hits me. So what do you think about? And I'm like, my God. So here I am, not in class.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, man, these people know I wasn't in class today, and I'm on the news. Like this is jacked up, right? And so I get to campus the next day. Kevin, we saw you were da 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 da. How can you do? And they were working with how to work with me on something. I'm thinking I'm in trouble. They're like, hey, don't forget about yesterday. That was all fine. But the point was, because of my spirit of giving back to the community, not being isolated to try to do for
Mm.
myself.
Yeah.
I was perpetually insulated, even at times when I didn't know I needed the insulation
Mm-hmm.
or the protection. So it's important to make sure that you take time to fortify yourself so that when you're in your spaces, you have something to share and to offer that's not already there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is what that knowledge did for me. It gave me something to stand on. So I looked at Afrocentrism when Dr. Asante would talk about it. And I
Mm.
began to look at how it could inform psychology as a practice,
Yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's how that grew. And that's grown now into what we call Ubuntu psychotherapy. But
Mm.
it was researching him, listening to him, engaging with him and those his contemporaries to understand them, being humble enough to listen
Mm.
and to ask the questions and not arrogant about what I knew, right? I didn't
Mm-hmm.
know enough at first, but when I knew enough, I had to back down. These people are really knowledgeable. And to this day, I still interact with them and I'm humbled by their knowledge. I interact with them, those that are living on a regular. There's a picture of me and Dr. Asante recently when he was in
Mm.
DC. Just, hey, let me talk to you about this. Let me ask you these
Mm-hmm.
questions. These things are very important.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yes. Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much for that wealth of knowledge, Dr. Washington. And just to close, I want to highlight and reemphasize Ubuntu. I am because we are. Whether you're at a HBCU, a PWI, that is a concept you can adopt and incorporate into your work, and also just to feel like I know we're at Howard, we're at the Mecca, we're at an HBCU, we have resources, and we're surrounded by people who look like us and can relate to certain experiences. But even if you are at a PWI, like some of the things Dr. Washington was talking about, books to read, people to connect
Mm-hmm.
with, organizations, things of that nature, you're not alone. And there is a wealth of knowledge that came before you, and people who can help inform your practice, inform your research. We talked about culturally competent research agendas earlier in the episode. So all of these things, you have a community, and so that's one reason why I really love and appreciate Ubuntu and that whole concept and idea. So just all in all, happy Black History Month. Thank you again for coming on this month and speaking with us, Dr. Washington. We appreciate it so much, and all the knowledge you've shared with us today.
Thank you for the invitation and to stay plugged in to Speak Black to Me. That's a YouTube channel that I have. We talk about some of these same topics we're developing out. And one of the things we're doing with this piece is that we're looking to generate resources to have a youth workforce development element in the Gambia. So we're going back and forth with youth from here and there. So, and then we're also developing out their whole practice for psychology in the Gambia. So this is
Mm.
this is exciting work. And so when you go in and check out Speak Black to Me, you're supporting the the global work
Mm.
of psychology for people of
Mm-hmm.
African descent. So it's not just about me, but also Mawata Speaks, MWATA Speaks.com. There's certain things that we talk about there that's designed to fortify who we are as a people. That's driven by the work of our elders. So
Mm.
anyway, that's what we do. That's how you contact and stay plugged in, because we're making sure that we are on a solid foundation, because we come from great people, right? We come from
Yes.
greatness.
Mm-hmm.
Mary McLeod Bethune clearly says that we are heirs and custodians of a great historical legacy.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Fukiya reminds us that we are a seed of 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 the seed, that we are the divine expression of all things that have ever been and that will ever be. And so if you are the seed of the seed, that means then that you have all knowledge and understanding. It's just a matter of tapping into it. The great
Mm-hmm.
lie that we tell ourselves is that the sun is coming out. The sun never went anywhere. The sun was always there. And why is that important to this conversation? Because our true knowledge, our essence, never goes anywhere. It
Mm-hmm.
just gets clouded by
Mm-hmm.
miseducation. It gets covered up, or we turn away from it because we don't believe that we have it, right? But if you recognize that in the Wiz and or the Wizard of Oz, that the lion went to go find courage, and that he was defending everybody. The scarecrow was trying to go get a brain. He thought of everything. The Tin Man wanted to go find a heart, and yet he was passionate about everything. And Dorothy had a dog with her, and the dog blew back the curtain and said, "Look, man, this ain't no wizard. This dude is fake." But the name of the dog, Toto, in Latin means everything. So in reality, Dorothy already left with everything.
Mm-hmm.
So the point of this of the narrative is to know that sometimes we're going to look for something that we already have,
Mm-hmm.
and so we don't have to go look in somebody else's backyard. We have diamonds in our own backyard. So
Mm-hmm.
so we are uh, we what's up? I'll stop with that.
That's right.
And Black History Month is reminds us that we are what is up. I mean, think about this,
Black History Month is all year long.
right? All year. The 5 things in your room right now that's been impacted by Black people. The microphone invented by a Black man, the computer technology, all right, the internet, a brother from Africa, right? The coltan tantalite
Mm-hmm.
comes from primarily from the Congo. The light in your room, Lewis Latimer. The shoes on your feet, in Matt Slinger, right? The potato chips in your cabinet over there, invented by a Black man, right? The ice cream scoop, the baby carriage. And if we recognize that all things great and wonderful that we experience
Mm-hmm.
have some connection to people of African descent, it changes how we walk in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And that is powerful. That even the academic experience that we have came out of ancient Kemet, when they understood the liberating arts, and they had the quadrivium and the trivium that was taken by the Greeks and the Romans, right? So you understood that the liberating arts was that if you understood who you were, you would ascend into your divinity in the educational system. So this is ancient Kemet in action, but also the first calendar that was ever invented, the stellar calendar 10,000 years ago, the first a solar calendar 4,000 years ago, and the first clock in this country was invented by a Black man. They all tied to the DNA of people of African descent. That says that the DNA, as Kenneth Lamar says, there's royalty in your DNA. And so you have no business walking around being a stepchild of anybody because you are what's up. So
Mm-hmm.
grand Black history season.
Yes.
Yes, I just also wanted to leave off on this concept has been reoccurring throughout the episode. So I just also wanted to leave another concept out there with which is Sankofa, which is an African word deriving from the Akan tribe in Ghana, which means it is not taboo to fetch what is at risk of being left behind. So we've been talking about always reaching back to move forward. So I just also wanted to throw that term out there for us to keep in our minds, in our work, and in our daily life.
Mm-hmm. And I think,
San, go back, go, con, fetch, get.
That's
Sankofa.
language.
It has the bird turned towards its tail feathers with a with an egg tape on by its heart shaped entity or gland.
Mm-hmm.
The egg symbolizes not only its future, that the egg will be the child that can come forward, but also its essence, where it came from.
mm-hmm.
It is not taboo to look back to your essence to figure out where you got to go. And you always look back in the past to make sure that the future is made better. A powerful piece when I was did research over in Azania, South Africa, studied Ubuntu.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where Ubuntu psychotherapy comes from. It says that our humanity is tied together and nothing we can
Mm-hmm.
do about that, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so it doesn't make sense in the European context because there are things about being individual. But we say things like, don't let your name beat you back home, or don't embarrass us, or
Mm-hmm.
that he's making us look bad, right? That is a collective identity. We even decide what we're going to drink. We drink Ciroc or Kvass or whatever it is. We dress a certain way, right?
Mhm.
There's a collective identity that we have, good or bad, but we have to recognize that that is who we are, Ubuntu, that we are human because our greatest power is found within our connectivity with others. So I'm quiet. Go ahead, Brittany, close us out. I won't say anything else. I promise you.
I think it's all important, and I feel like the huge takeaway from this episode is to know your history and know how important it is for us moving forward.
Mhm.
So let's just close it out like we said. On the next episode, you all can look forward to us doing something similar to what we did this month with Black History Month. Next month is Women's History Month, so we'll be focusing on women in psychology. Of course, you all can follow us on social media at Psyched Podcast. That's PsychdPodcast. Psyched Podcast. And be sure to look out for our next episode on all streaming platforms and YouTube for visuals.